thank you all for participating. I know we have a good group that's online and listening, and Dr. Henry really covered the basics of the disease and provided a lot of good information. What my role is, and for those that we are breaking this up into 2 segments to view online. So if you are just listening to this one, I encourage you to listen to Dr. Henry's video link as well, because he's going to go over a lot more of the background. I'm not going to spend the time on that. I'm going to just solely focus on the youth project side. And while Dr. Henry talked, kind of helped set up some aspects, I'm going to try and cover it in a little bit more detail in mine. And so as we look at our youth projects, I think I just want to take first just a brief history of how those individuals and families that are showing in our youth swine projects have changed. If we'd go back 20 to 30 years ago, the vast majority of youth showing swine projects were from families that actually had some sows or breeding stock at home. A lot of them raised their own commercial pigs. They maybe raised some purebred animals. And most of those that showed actually raised what their family raised. There was certainly sales of pigs that were to other people, but a lot of our youth that showed were actually from offspring that the family raised themselves. And this was mainly due to disease transmission concerns. So what we're talking about today isn't anything new. It's something that's been around for a period of time. And in fact, we just bring a new disease to the table as we talk about PED. In Kansas, if we go historically, in 1985, the KSU Swine Classic Hog Show started here in Manhattan. And it's believed, Dr. Bob Heinz and others that were part of that, they believe it was the first summer or spring hog show prior to county fair in the state. And it was primarily set up as an educational, and still is today, primary emphasis on education as well as a hog show. But that was the start of this. And prior to that, a lot of people, families didn't want to have their pigs out due to disease concerns because of their breeding stock at home. Well, today it's very different in terms of the background and those that are showing in the Swine Youth Project. Certainly the majority do not have breeding animals at home, and they only have growing and market pigs for 6 to 7 months a year. And really, this really starts the swine projects for the vast majority of our youth in Kansas, start really in March and go through May in terms of when they actually purchase their animals, and they weigh generally in the 50 to 100 pound range. And if you, again, refer back to Dr. Henry's discussion of animals and when they're most affected, obviously those that are nursing are the ones that we have our high mortality in. We get pigs 50 to 100 pounds. They obviously can be infected, but their signs will just be diarrhea, generally recover from that in a short period of time. So one big take-home message, and we spent a lot of time this spring on, is as youth are purchasing pigs, if it had PED or if it gets PED, it's highly likely the pig will not die. It'll just have diarrhea, be sick for a couple days and recover. So that's a big aspect when dealing with this group of youth and families and the questions they have. And then for us, the majority of our fair projects end in July and August with county fair. Those individuals that go on to show at State Fair and the Wichita Junior Livestock Show, that's part of that then as well. But September, obviously there's a few families that show during the whole entire year, but 95+% are done at county fair or State Fair or Wichita. I would estimate, going through lists, and we get a lot of notices on shows and different websites that post, I would estimate there's somewhere between 40 to 45 spring and summer shows annually now in Kansas prior to county fair season. So there's a big opportunity for disease transmission within this population. This isn't, obviously PED brings it to light. We've dealt with this in the past, most recently with circovirus. There's a good vaccine for circovirus, so that concern is much lower. But again, historically, we've had different diseases that we deal with. Certainly each year there's different respiratory diseases that come up. People will come home from shows. We'll get calls, my pigs are really sick, they're coughing, they're hacking, they're off feed. So we end up with a lot of respiratory type problems that still arise. PED is the newest one we're dealing with this year. And so again, we just have a big opportunity, and not only in Kansas, a lot of these shows are 50 to 250 head. As we get close to our bordering counties or some of the circuit shows, we end up with pigs out of Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Nebraska as well. So again, not only in Kansas, but we have some crossing the state lines as well. So one question, and that is why this group, and why is there 40 to 45 spring shows? Why has the Youth Swine Project honestly generally has maintained or increased in numbers really across the U.S.? And I think there's going to be a couple reasons. In the next couple slides, I'll go through that. The reality is, since most of our people showing swine are not from farms themselves, they may have acreages, they may have a small farm, but don't raise, again, market animals, commercial animals, or breeding stock. Quite honestly, they're fairly easy. You can do them with limited facilities. You provide good shade and protection, clean water, and feed, and you can have a pig project in most cases. It's seasonal in nature. Again, you buy your pigs in March and April. A lot of people are done in July at county fair. That's very conducive to not overlapping with so many school and other activities when you have the summer to be with them. And that's really compared to beef projects that start in the fall. And they're an excellent beginner species project. They're generally a safe project for our juniors and that start, certainly compared to large beef animals, and also for anybody that's had sheep. We know that they can be a tough project for the young kids to handle when they are small in size. So there's a lot of reasons that swine as well as goats are kind of chosen as beginner projects for youth. One of the big reasons, too, is on a national basis, the National Swine Registry, Team Purebred, which is also a makeup of a number of the purebred breeds, National Pork Board, our state pork associations, and various industry partners, over the last 10 years has really emphasized the youth aspect of these projects and being involved. The National Swine Registry, if you go back about 15 years, I believe they had about 400 or 500 junior members. Today there's over 12,000. And so there's a lot of emphasis to get more youth involved in the swine, and there's nothing but positive for the swine industry long term by having this involvement. There's a lot of responsibility, all the things of why we do these projects, and that's why we encourage these projects. We just need to make sure we're using our best practices, that we're not causing problems for the commercial industry or other producers that have swine as well as related to disease transfer. We all recognize the huge value and why we have youth participate in these events. So let's take a step back to disease risk and the population of pigs within the youth projects. And this is not new. Again, as we've talked about, PED is new. It's bad. We need to make sure we're taking the right steps. But for those that have been involved for many years, many of you are listening on this webinar, it's just a new challenge that we have to deal with. The reality is that we are mixing pigs from a number of locations, which is bad when we talk about the potential for disease transfer. We have a lot of different immunity. Some may be infected, some not. And we just have that issue in terms of getting new animals infected. The bottom line, though, is that if you look at this third bullet, the associated risk is the decision of the owners as they decide to intermingle their pigs at weigh-ins, spring shows, other fairs, and if they bring their pigs back home. Dr. Henry really touched on this with fairs, and if people have breeding stock at home, they're obviously by far the biggest risk in terms of having mortalities as part of this disease. For those, and we went through, and for anybody in Kansas that'll be listening to this, we have extensive weigh-in tagging guidelines. This year there was a lot of flexibility issued to those individuals that did not want to come to a common site. I know there was a lot of tags put in and pictures taken and those submitted. Those are all common sense things we need to do to help protect the swine industry and those producers that have sows and piglets at home. So what is the project risk? Again, as Dr. Henry talked, it's highly infectious. The bottom line, though, is that the death loss is about 100% for those under 10 days of age when they get infected immediately after birth. But the bottom line in red is that there's little death loss in weaned and older pigs, dehydration, diarrhea, weight loss for maybe 1 to 5 days. It could be shorter, could be longer in different cases. Thus, youth swine projects are effective for a short period of time, but should and will recover quickly with no or very, very minimal death loss in these older pigs. So again, we've highlighted that. We think that has to be an important part of our message. So how do we prevent the spread within this population? We have to take on the responsibility in the youth swine projects. We are part of a larger industry. While this group is a smaller percentage of the total pigs, it encompasses a lot of people. But that doesn't preclude us from protecting the larger commercial industry that we need, that really is a sustained interest in the sustained producers within our industry in general. The reality is it's very hard to limit exposure to other pigs. If there's an infected pig that's shedding virus at one of our spring shows, county fair, whatever, the reality is the other pigs have a high probability of picking it up. One of the main reasons, if you look in the center of the slide, you all been to shows, we use common penning areas, we run animals across the same scale, we use the same wash rack areas for all the pigs, holding areas, show rings, loadout areas. So any animal that's been shedding virus, and it's so highly contagious to be able to spread, we're going to spread it quite easily. And just due to logistics, that's just part of what we're dealing with. And so the opportunity for good biosecurity at a swine show is, quite honestly, we're fooling ourselves most times. We can do, some isolation if you have corner pens, those things, but those animals are still oftentimes occupying the same area that all the other pigs are. So again, when we return the pigs home, most facilities are small in size. So we don't have big barns to house just a couple pigs. And if we didn't take pigs to a particular fair, they're generally in adjoining pens just due to how our facilities are set up. And so again, while we can do our best to create different areas of the barn or even different sites if that's possible, it's very hard not to prevent cross-infection at home if one of the pigs, in fact, does have PED. Again, one of the things on the recovery side to visit about, we need to make sure we're offering fresh drinking water. One of the things I continually run into, and we spend a lot of time, is too many of our youth projects, they fill up big water tanks, and it's stale water or they're not cleaning cups. We have to make sure that we're providing clean water to those animals, especially if they're infected, to make sure that they increase their hydration rate and that we don't discourage them drinking water from it being filthy. One of the things too, if animals are loose and they have loose stools, it's pretty easy to transfer that into water cups and everything else. They get coughing, we blow it all over. We got to make sure that we're cleaning those water cups and waters out. Electrolytes, this is an area that many youth project people use, but this is something we've got to be very cautious of. While they can help hydrate, kind of like a Gatorade for a pig, we should not overdo it, because increased electrolytes can also make the animals loose. And so if we have a loose stool to start with, dosing them with higher levels of electrolytes than what's recommended is only going to make the stool situation worse. So again, common sense. Dr. Henry already talked about, I want to emphasize, there's no magical feed additives or supplements known. There's a number of things being marketed. Frankly, they just don't, there's no science behind them. These older pigs should recover okay. Clean water, good feed will be okay. Common sense is the best medicine. Spending a bunch of extra money on these older pigs is not a good idea. How to help, again, continue how to help spread PED. Again, as we look at the concern, and it is a concern, and in my job I balance it. I work obviously primarily on the commercial swine industry. That's where I focus my time. I also have interest in the youth project side. I spend time judging shows, my own kids, and I'll get to that. We're involved in showing some of these youth projects as well. But we have a serious obligation on the youth project side, is not to transfer the disease or do what we can to prevent the disease spread to any other pigs, but especially the commercial operations. As time has went on, the commercial side has gained greater support for our youth projects. They do much more funding of scholarships and for our local programs. We cannot jeopardize that by not taking this seriously and helping out the entire industry. And so what we know is that PED is going to affect operations large or small. I know of one operation that had 2 sows. They ended up getting PED and lost both litters. It doesn't matter size. That is no boundary. As we look at the greatest risks, we need to make sure that families that have breeding animals, they are associated with the greatest risk breeding at home, and it's always been that way. They have to make decisions more even tougher this year if they're going to be involved, or if they show at county fair, obviously not bring those animals back home. This last point is pretty important. Most larger operations have policies in place that do not allow their employees to have other swine at home, and that's to prevent the potential disease transfer back and forth. And again, that's a good practice, and the commercial operations put in place for some of their employees, and that makes a lot of sense. We need to do our part on the youth side, not to spread disease back to the commercial side as well, by using our best judgment. Okay, so how have some of our suppliers of youth projects handled it this spring? And it's been all over the board. Again, we're in the first year. We've learned a lot. But certainly there is still a limited number of producers that host sales on farm. And they do that. They recognize they need to have people on farm. But a number of those that did it this year in Kansas, they implemented a policy that no one came to the farm prior to sale day. In the past, they would have had visitors in probably for 2 weeks leading up to the sale. Those that had sales on site, I know I talked to many of them, they did not allow anybody on the farm until the morning of the sale, which I would support as being a good practice to minimize that risk. The second point, there's been an explosion of internet sales, and this has been a couple reasons. One, the producers want a greater reach selling their pigs, but also it's a lot this spring driven on biosecurity. It's cut down on the number of traffic on these individual operations that have breeding stock. Anecdotally, there's been many producers that have not, whether they would have gotten it before, if they'd have still had their sale on farm, you don't know, but many of them have been able to keep it out as they've changed to an internet sale. The negative is, and it's part of the youth project, and this is a sideline, but it's a loss of personal relationships, educational opportunities for youth to be there in person. Oftentimes it can come at a higher cost for the youth projects buying on internet sales. But the reality is that group, we need to do our part to help here. Other steps to prevent. For many of those that do have breeding stock, they basically went on lockdown January, February, March this year when their pigs were born. They did not allow visitors. They should not go visit other herds, and they should not introduce other swine into their herd. I know of one particular case here in Kansas that was raising youth project. They were farrowing, kind of had some partnerships. They transferred a gilt, bred animal to their place to farrow from one of their partners. And in fact, they brought the PED and they lost litters themselves because the original farm did not know that they had PED. So again, we need to stop that transfer of breeding stock for those that are during that time, just to minimize the risk. Clean clothes, shoes, and hats when visits occur. We need to make sure when visits occur, we're cleaning up. We recommend, and you should not ever feel bad to tell somebody that they need to be wearing clean clothes and not shoes that have been on farm. We need to prevent, this is one here, prevent loading in. And this year it wasn't PED, but PRRS could be traced. Somebody lost 10 of their litters due to a severe PRRS outbreak. It was traced back to a sow buying station. They delivered sows. There was contact within that loading dock back in the trailer, and they brought it home. Another good example. We cannot do that. We need to have better biosecurity to prevent these. Again, trailers, transporters, we must be clean, disinfected, free of fecal material. And again, at home, trying to prevent direct contact between pig pens, but honestly that's not practical in many cases, but it is a good practice if we can do that. When we get home, clean show equipment, wash with soap and water. Again, the biggest thing is to remove fecal material and other organic matter, and that's all the different equipment. Shoes of everyone. This is easy to forget. It's very easy to track manure from the shows or other operations back home. Getting those clean, and again, wash. This bottom one here. This is a good one that we need to think about when we're washing and disinfecting our equipment. Once we get back home, don't do it in the spot that you're going to have additional pig traffic or foot traffic over. I know personally we have a grass area outside of our barn where there is no other, we don't exercise, don't have other foot traffic. That's where we wash, disinfect. It's out in the sun. We let the equipment dry, hopefully decrease and keep things as sanitized as possible for ourselves. Don't do this in the wash rack at home. Don't do it in the pen. It's got to be an area that you prevent the cross-contamination. That's the whole point. We'll talk about disinfecting here in a slide or two. And again, completely dry before storage. Sunlight is a great way to help kill viruses. Keeping that equipment out in the sun is a very effective way after we get them cleaned up. So again, Dr. Henry already talked about this, but the most important thing is removing organic matter. If we're cleaning and still have poop on equipment, we didn't get it clean enough. That's where this virus is residing. We need to get rid of that if we want our disinfectants to actually work and be effective. We've already talked about the different types. Again, bleach is one of the most common because it's readily available, it's low cost. 6 ounces of bleach per gallon would be a typical dilution that we would kind of try and run. But again, for those that do fairgrounds, other things, again, Beercon-esque, A-Cell, others are very good options as well. Just we want to make sure that we're doing things as good as we can on a disinfectant standpoint. Okay, practical suggestions. For those individuals that are around commercial pigs and youth shows, great care must be taken not to spread either way. Back to clean clothes and shoes. Have specified or isolated storage areas for farm shoes and boots. It doesn't do any good if you have shoes and boots that get full of manure and you track up into your garage area, put them off on the side, and then with your clean shoes, walk in that direct path. Take them off, have a designated area that you cut down on the direct foot traffic because, again, this spreads through fecal. It's going to spread through shoes, picking up fecal from shoe to shoe. Downtime. There's no science in terms of when we say downtime is just physical, no longer being around pigs from one group to the next. This gets hard in many cases for some of the youth project side. For those on the commercial side and balancing this is really a non-option. This is already done in many circumstances on commercial operations before myself, Dr. Henry, go and visit commercial operations. There's downtime between, and this is something I know I personally practice when, again, I work on the commercial side. If I know I'm going to a commercial farm, I don't go down to my barn for 3 days personally, where the show pigs are. My kids are old enough; they're taking care of most of them anyway. I just avoid any sort of traffic contact to prevent any personal chance of exposure back and forth. So, from educational information, the National Pork Board has their website, pork.org/PEDv. These are 3 publications they have that deal with the youth livestock side, from the exhibitors to the organizers to biosecurity. Also, again, everybody should have received, the extension educator should have seen a couple times our tagging recommendations. That process is fairly well done, or there's a little bit more going on. If you have questions, please let Dr. Mike Tokash or myself know, and we'll help get that information to you. And that just deals with the biosecurity of tagging, as well as has the disinfectant information on that publication as well. So again, I've talked about my personal balance a little bit. My family, I grew up in South Dakota. I'm from a purebred breeding stock. Ever since I was old enough to walk, I've been showing pigs. It's afforded me opportunities in my life that I give a lot of credit to. That's allowed me to actually probably do a lot of things in my job and my personal growth that's benefited me, and I want that exposure and opportunity for my kids. We don't have breeding stock at home, but we're the typical 4-H family that gets pigs in March and they're done in September. And so, again, I take many steps personally. I avoid my pig barn for 3 days if I know I'm going to a commercial operation. Have separate areas for boots. Certainly when I have my work clothes, shoes, I never go into the barn after work or before I go. I always go to the house, change, then make it in. And so things like that we must do as we balance some of the biosecurity. We don't want to cause a problem either way. So is it spreading? I can personally say I've been to several spring shows. I mean, on this, looking through the roster, I know I've been part of spring shows. I ask everybody, people are probably getting sick of me asking as we're at these events, but people in general haven't believed that they've seen the severe diarrhea as they've went home, or no different than in the past. Dr. Henry talked, pigs get loose at these shows. We change water, we change feed, we get a little stress, and pigs get a little looser stool anyway. The reality is that we don't know. If we just judge diarrhea, these pigs are now, most of them are 120 to 180 pounds. You know, they may or may not get diarrhea. And so we do not know if PED is prevalent in this population, if it's spreading or not. The reality is it has to be to some degree, but we don't have science behind to know. So we just need to consider, in this case, frankly, I just consider all the pigs PED positive, and we just need to deal with it as such. And that's my personal view, and that's the biosecurity I try and take with myself. In terms of, I just consider them all positive, whether they are or not, then take the precautions needed. Testing of fairgrounds, this was a little bit discussed before and after the show. That would really help us know if PED is spreading or present in this population. It'd be easy to go to the wash rack, show ring different areas and sample. I think this practice is now, I'm personally discouraging it now just due to the mandatory reporting that's coming up. Again, from the side, I don't think what we want is our fairgrounds on a governmental list, or all the individuals that were there to end up on lists. Until we know the rules, I'm not comfortable doing that, but it would be a good measuring tool to know if this population has PED or shedding PED at this time. So in summary, my final slide, youth that are involved in swine projects are going to continue to be. It's an important aspect to build future leaders and employees in our swine industry. But we need to protect the overall industry, because the youth projects represent a very small proportion of the total number of pigs in the U.S. population. PED does not appear to be more or less prevalent in our youth projects, so youth projects are the same in my view. There's no science to say different. We are as susceptible to the disease as any large commercial operation. Oftentimes I'll hear the smaller producers, show pigs, they're tougher to disease than commercial pigs. I don't buy that at all. I have never seen science to prove that, and judging by some of these small operations that contracted PED this year, I'd have a hard time believing anybody making those statements. Steps to minimize should be done. We need to continue to build awareness and continue with a common message, and that's the important on this. Education is the key, but it's a common message to our youth, the parents, as well as our consumers, that this does not affect food safety, and that we just continue to move forward and do the best we can, but we also need to be aware and protect the overall swine industry. So with that, that concludes my portion of this related to the youth project side. And again, can answer any questions that may come up in the chat session to help address any, and also be interested if anybody has personal experience with some of the youth project side, what they've done, or questions or concerns that have come up that would be beneficial for the whole group to hear.
Okay, thank you, Joel. And I remind everybody that if you have questions, please submit them via the chat room. You can submit them to all, or you can send them to Joel or I personally, privately, if you want to. We did have one question that came in that I'll address to Dr. Henry. Is about introducing new breeding stock into a commercial operation. Are there any ways that you can test the incoming stock to know whether they are compatible with your disease status of your farm?
Well, that's an excellent question. And sadly enough, we're still in the process of developing and validating antibody tests. In other words, can we take a blood sample and know if these animals have had any of the coronaviruses? Our researchers, Dr. Dick Hesse and Dr. Ying Fang at K-State, are working hard on that along with researchers around the country. Today, we do not have validated tests that are accurate enough to let us know even if those animals have certainly been exposed. We also lack information about long-term carrier states on these animals. So, excellent question. Sad answer is no. There isn't a method we have there. And while I'm on this line, I do have a follow-up to the question on disinfectants. If you go Google Virkon S, I didn't know about this product, but they have Virkon S tablets that can be used to make up small quantities of disinfectant. That might be just a really useful tool to have for application at fairground shows and so on. I am personally pretty concerned about excess Clorox use or chlorine hypochlorite. There's a lot of stuff that's negative that goes on with that product, including turning the bottom of your jeans white. But I think it's something that we have to be careful of for our protection of our people and our animals. And the Virkon oxidizers, A-cell, might just be a good way to go. Google it up, take a look. I sent it to Joel and Mike, and it might be something we can help use as an educational tool for everybody. I appreciate the questions and the comments.
Okay, I've not seen any other questions come in across the chat line. Joel, I'll turn things back over to you to finish up the webinar, unless you've had some questions on that end.
Nope. Again, appreciate everybody that participated in. And again, just a reminder that this will be posted, and we'll send that link out. What our attempt is that this will be broken into 2 separate segments, one of Dr. Henry's and then a separate one, mine, dealing with the youth project. And so we'll have those available for use. They obviously overlap together, with a lot of common areas, but in order for size and for posting, keeping those separate. But as you have questions, there's a lot to learn. This is very dynamic. It's very fluid. If you have concerns, you hear different rumors or different things that you hear or concerns from families, I would say please let us know. It's something that we would like to help with. We feel we need to help with. And we're all in this together, and we're just trying to figure out the best way to make this all best for all of our swine producers in the commercial and in the youth project side. So with that, thank you for your participation, and we'll be in touch in terms of the web links for this.